sea and lives on the sea. And the only times it goes ashore is during the breakup and to have its den tub the baby. The female birds go into the den along a hill. There's a deep snowdrift, makes a little tunnel inside, and stays in there for 3 to 4 months. And the cubs are bonded. So that's on it. The land mammals starts with lemmings. It's the smallest of the mammal. And lemming, like in the Arctic food chain, lemming, Arctic hare, caribou, muskox, or herbivores. They convert the plant into meat. And then there are the predators like weasel, Arctic weasel. It's like ermine you would call it, but we call it the weasel. It's a small animal that feeds on the lemmings. And then the Arctic fox, which is basically a scavenger, but it also hunts the lemmings.
Are there lemmings around here?
Yes. And lemmings go through a cycle as well. And then the Arctic hare is so big, the foxes can't really hunt the hare.
Right.
The one that the Inuit got today. But then the wolves is the next big predator. Feeds on caribou and Arctic hare and the muskox.
Are there wolves in this area?
Yeah. So these are the land predators, like weasel, fox, and wolf. And then man, of course, on the top of the food chain. But the polar bear is a marine mammal. It really preys on seals. That's 100% or 90% of its food. Then, of course, it feeds on whales a bit and walrus. And then the migratory birds come through here after end of May. And they all nest here, and then the foxes, and then, of course, wolves feed on them as well as eggs. Usually the chicks gets it and hatch in late August. Like lot of variety of gulls and fulmars and ducks and geese. In the ocean mammals we get seal. Seal is the most important food chain.
And that's the ring seal?
Yeah.
Just R-I-N-G?
The ring seal stays here 12 months of the year. There are some migratory seals like the harp seals that come only after July, which you might have seen thousands of them on the Labrador coast.
Where they used to club them.
Yeah, right. But they only come here in July and August. Then we have one seal called bearded seal, which is one of the largest of the seals that come here. That usually stays in open water, so do the harp seals. They come up to what we call the flow edge, where the ice ends and the ocean begins. They come up there. And sometimes these seals also hang around the so-called polynias. It's a Russian word, polynia, P-O-L-Y-N-I-A.
Means window.
Is that what it means?
I have some Russians that work with me, and I asked them one time.
But I always explain polynia here, it would mean water surrounded by ice. So we have few polynias kept open by the strong currents that come. It's cold currents, but swift currents. What else we have? Yeah, we also get hooded seals. It's also very big, sort of the male blows up kind of a reddish hood to attract the female.
And do those, you actually get those here close to Resolute Bay?
Yeah, you can get all these seals I'm describing at the season around Resolute. And walrus, and then narwhal, beluga whales. And seldom nowadays the bowhead whale. Bowhead whale is also known as Greenland whale. It's basically a baleen whale, toothless baleen whale. Feeds on all the plankton and krill.
Yeah, apparently Flip Nicklin was the first one to photograph them in the water.
Huh.
So
Now, do the as far as like the walrus, narwhal, and beluga, is that later on in the towards summer more that they're here, or?
They are here even in the winter. Like the walrus, there's a polynia about 70 or 80 miles north of here, near a small island called Dundas Island. The walrus stays the year round. There are something like 30 to 40 animals here. But the whales hang around at the flow edge. like the beluga
Like
whales.
the belugas we saw.
Yeah. So the Inuit sometimes go to the floe edge at the end of the ice and hunt these whales. And so do the polar bears hang around the... I have seen
Well, it seems to be
claw marks, healed claw marks on the whales that the Eskimos killed probably several years later. Because you can see the birds must have attacked it from the ice when the whales were swimming by
Jumped
close
off
to the
the
ice
ice.
edge.
Wow.
Yeah, but they couldn't get it, obviously.
Yeah.
Then later on the whales, the back healed, of course, and then
Wow.
a year or two later the Inuit get it. So poor animals.
Are the Inuit restricted on how many belugas they take?
No, belugas there's no restriction here.
Oh, really?
On Baffin Island they're putting some restrictions now. But we do have restrictions for narwhal. Our community we can take 20. And Pond Inlet and Arctic Bay are not Baffin. They get thousands of narwhal there, so they allowed a bit more. I think 100 each community. Grease Fjord is 20 and us 20. Polar bears are controlled. We can get 38 for this community. And 33 polar bears for Grease Fjord. Seals there's no control.
How many people live in Grease Fjord?
Right now about 100.
A polar bear in every pod.
Have y'all had many divers come down here before?
Not that many. We've had divers, but
scientific ones.
scientific ones, like we had from Bahamas, we had some divers from the underwater
Your
explorers.
next say.
Fellow by the name of John Englander.
Yeah. He's originally from the Boston area.
Well, actually, they not only came for diving, they also did a sledge trip. So
They
became-
used to do those. They used to have a like $6,000 or $8,000 trip they ran up here. I checked
Yeah.
into it like 6-7 years ago, I think.
They did a couple of times, but they had an underwater sort of a capsule in 1971 or 72, I forgot the exact year. But Prince Charles came here at that time. He also dove Bezal Bay here.
Yeah.
We have a Canadian diver, he's a very high profile guy by the name of Joe McGuinness.
Yeah.
He's into, like he's got good contacts, like he came up and had to dive with
Bezal Bay.
He didn't dive with Bezal Bay, but he was the organizer for it.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Has anyone dove at the North Pole? Sorry. I didn't mean
No,
to-
you go ahead, because I'm
Has
still...
anyone gone scuba diving at the North Pole?
As far as I know, I'm sure people would have dived there for scientific studies, because there's a Lomonosov range a little south of the pole, and then there's some other range there. They were doing all kinds of hydrographic studies in that area. Like I never come to know about what scientists do. Like, I'm sure they would have done something, but not as tourists yet. Not that I know of from the Canadian side.
How many times have you been to the pole?
Over 20 times.
Wow.
The first couple times was exciting.
After that, it's work.
Now, is it true, I was reading in the LA Times thing, is it true that you really have a red and white striped pole that you take out there for people if they really want it?
Oh yeah, I have it in my garage. I can show you.
That would be
The
great.
pilots tease the guys. Where's the North Pole? Oh, Bezal's got it in his garage.
We should get a picture of us
We
all.
really
We were
need to,
at the
so we
North
can
Pole.
say we were at the North Pole. That would be fantastic.
Just walk down on the ice and
No,
stand there.
I'm not the only one that carries the stripe. That's 10 o'clock curfew. Kids go to bed.
Oh, really? They have curfew here.
Oh, the siren wasn't working. They just fixed it. So
Oh, because the other night we were out at...
go to places like where we went. If
That
I
wasn't
took you to the
yeah.
magnetic pole, other than the psychological satisfaction you get, it's absolutely nothing.
Right.
I mean,
Oh, we made the
nothing
right choice.
physical there.
That was an exciting day.
Here, you see Grease Fjord is a community. You see how other people live. On, which is still longer.
Yeah.
But then you got to see beluga whales and walrus, and the scenery is very pretty, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we made the right
I don't
choice.
think
Do,
there's any comparison.
Do the Inuits use the dogs much this time of year? It seems like they're all just tied up, sitting there doing nothing. Do they take them
They
out?
only keep the dogs to do the sports hunting for the southerners, because the Canadian government law states that outsiders
They have
have
to
to.
use
The
if you
dogs
wanna
have
hunt
just
the
done
polar
their
bear,
work,
you have to go
haven't
by
they?
dog sled.
The dogs have just done their season.
That's done there. That's
Yeah,
it now.
that's why they're all
So they
retired.
just leave them there chained up for the rest of the
stand
year?
up and they'll move it to the land, because when they crap, on the land, there's too much them to clean up.
Yeah.
The ice, when the ice goes out, they all go out because part of the food chain. So that's part of the reason. Plus, is, people have to have their dogs tied up here, because we have young children playing outside, and
Yeah. Too many
the
dog
dogs are
fights.
hungry.
too.
Plus,
Yeah.
we have this valuable hides like polar bear hides and muskox
Hanging out.
hides drying.
Yeah.
So if the dog chewed up, it's
It's a lot of money.
$1,000 or more for a good polar bear hide. So it's not
Yeah.
worth it anymore. That's part of it.
It just seems like the dogs are fairly neglected. They just tie them up and leave
Yeah,
them
it's
down there.
unfortunate. One time, if the dogs were neglected, if they didn't have the dogs for the next for hunting, they would have starved to death.
Yeah.
But now we have a good welfare system and we have everything. So I would say it's our culture has screwed up their culture in some
Yeah.
ways. I mean, it's easy to blame our culture for it, but on the other hand,
Well, I think you're right. I think that's largely
we shouldn't.
I only caught bits and pieces of the conversation about Franklin's expedition.
Yeah, Sir
So-
John Franklin is sort of a person that explored the Western Arctic, the Mackenzie area as well. Then he was also, I don't know if you guys know about this guy, he was also Governor General of Tasmania in New Zealand. Sorry, Australia.
Yeah.
Australia. Eagle Tasman, and that's what it's called, Tasmania. But anyway, because I didn't even know about it, because Dick Smith took us to Tasmania, and we went and saw his bungalow. They still
Oh, when you were in
maintain a
Australia?
governor's house.
Yeah.
Pardon? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a historic place there.
Who took you there?
Dick Smith.
Who's
This
that?
guy that went to North Pole there.
He's an Australian. He's a real extrovert loud who takes a video of himself when he's going around. G'day mate, here I am in the North Pole, etc. etc.
Is he a broadcaster or something?
Yeah, he's a television sort of.
He also started the company called Australian Geographic.
Oh, sure.
He's a very, he's sort of an industrial entrepreneur.
Okay.
Anyway, so Sir John Franklin headed an expedition from Britain, and May of 1845, I believe, he left England for looking for the Northwest Passage, because
18 when? I'm sorry.
1845, May of 1845.
Good old Blighty.
He headed a two-ship convoy. The Erebus and Terror were the name of the two ships. And he had another captain, Crozier.
What great names for boats.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about some of those, if you don't mind. What are some of the more interesting
He was
boats?
regular conventional type you would call, like Naomi Uemura. He was one of the Japanese explorers that went solo to the North Pole in 1978. He was the first guy to use a satellite transmitter. NASA and the Smithsonian gave him this unit. He's the first guy in my books that has really made it to the pole. The rest of the guys claim, like I would use that word, claim to have made it to the pole. Like there's a bit of controversy.
Mhm.
Like a lot of people trying to prove that Perry didn't make it. This guy didn't make it. Everybody's sort of fighting over it. I know I've seen a lot of people coming here and lying as well. So I wouldn't give anybody any credit. I would just tell them they all claim to have made it. From Perry, it's fine, in their times,
Right.
didn't have proper equipment. But Naomi Uemura was the first guy to use the satellite tracking thing. So we know where he was.
Yeah.
He does not tell us. Because you can go and camp, like you can ask Ken Borak or any airline to ask you to drop you off at Land's End, Northern Greenland or Northern Ellesmere, it doesn't matter where you start from, somewhere there. And you can go and pitch a tent for 90 days with enough supplies. So you can tell all kinds of stories to me, what you did and all that. But then after 90 days, you can say to come and pick you up at this place. And you can tell me that you went there and came back. I have to take your word for it.
Right.
Whereas this is the only guy, unless you carry a satellite transmitter.
Uh-huh.
That technology only came about in the mid-70s.
And how do you spell his name?
Uyemura, U-E-M-U-R-A.
U.
E-M-U-R-A. Now everybody's carrying one of those, but even now I know some guys are trying to cheat because they...
There's that guy who left from England to sail around the world. He was in his mid-50s, and it turned out he was a manic depressive.
Yeah,
he went off.
Suicide, didn't he?
He did, yeah,
I know.
off Cape Town.
Yeah,
and
Canary Islands somewhere. I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, or a little further south, I think. But he went out on this yacht and stayed away for a couple of years, and just kept going on the HF radio and ringing
telling
back
that where he was.
and telling him he was in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then he just
and then
committed
this
suicide.
Greek
didn't
ship
he?
or something came from the U.S. going across.
Yeah.
Saw this little boat sitting there, and he thought he maybe needed some help, so he went there, and the guy jumped overboard. But he left a diary how much he was pressured by the media,
Yeah.
telling like
Wow.
this guy's going to be great.
And it was
Pressure put on these guys. But I use a simple example. This kind of storytelling goes back to Columbus' time even further earlier, because
Sure.
look at what Columbus said. He was in India. If there weren't any people living in these places, we would have taken his word for it. I mean, luckily there were people living in India as well as people living in the New World, so they figured out he's wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
So at North Pole there's nobody living, so you couldn't, like, by going to the magnetic pole, you couldn't say that you went to the magnetic pole if there was somebody living. But right now there isn't anybody there. Like
Yeah.
Visfjord, there are people there to say, yeah, Vince did come here.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's the difference. So, like, unless you're tracking with the modern technology, then it's different.
Yeah.
Terry mentioned you had the motorcycle expedition through here.
Yeah, we have had some unusual expeditions, like the motorcycle guy wanted to go there, but
Did he ever make it to the pole?
yeah, he did. He did mainly because he listened to all the people that lived here. We told him he should take to Eskimos with 2 snowmobiles and sledges for support to carry all this gas and things. Because originally, like, there was a guy attempt here in 1974. A guy from Toronto came. Kawasaki sponsored him. He just wanted to carry, like, when such expeditions tell stories like, I'm going to have raisins stuffed in my handlebars for emergency ration. It sounds very good to you as a reporter. So you write all these things. But he's an idiot as far as we're concerned.
Raising stuff that he's
That's exactly how the media's wrote.
Yeah.
Like the Canadian media wrote all these things, and he was having a little sled pulling behind him and all that story. And then the guy was lost even behind that hangar at the airport. He couldn't even navigate in Westwood Bay. But anyway, he was flown up to Wadden Island, and then he spent 2-3 days, and he called back and said to pick him up. He's not going to go, but he left a note there. It's a little guest book there in the shack. It said, I left my motorcycle facing the North Pole, so I'll be back, or something like that. Big deal.
Yeah.
He flew back, and $25,000 later. And then
And all he
the
managed to do was
commissioner
park
at that
his
time took the
motorbike
motorcycle
facing
and he was
north.
going to put it at the museum, Man's Folly or something.
Yeah.
People do crazy. Anyway, this Japanese motorcycle guy, he came the first year with his motorcycle. He figured out this. He cannot pull a sled, pulling with gas and everything. Like, you need fuel. It's not going to put salt water or something.
Did Steger come through here? Will Steger?
Yes,
Yeah.
What year was the Japanese motorcyclist?
87. We had a guy that wanted to go to the North Pole by ice boat, because a lot of deception too. Like some guys, like we had a French guy that wanted to go to the North Pole by ice boat. You know, this guy actually wanted to go to the magnetic pole. In French you say pole nord magnétique in a little brackets in a magnetic. but everybody only reads this pole node. They forget this little magnetic. Many
Yeah.
people in the world don't even know what's the difference between
Right,
magnetic and
right.
geographic node pole. So this guy comes here around 75, and he hired in 75. The magnetic pole was on Bathurst Island, only about 70 miles west of us. And this guy goes maybe 20 miles or so on the ice, pulled by this Eskimo man, because most of the time he couldn't sail with this ice boat, you know. And then, and he goes back to France and he says,
I got within 50
I haven't
miles.
seen the paper myself, but I heard many friends of mine told me that everybody in France thought this guy went to the pole with this ice boat because the newspaper wrote, you know, I forgot his name now, Francois somebody, so went to the North Pole by ice boat, pole node, magnetic in brackets. And that Reuters or Associated Press, the news goes all over the world. And the Japanese reader read it as they would have forgotten the magnetic in the translation. Just
Sure.
put pole node. So this one guy comes up here with the ice boat. He wants to go to the geographic North Pole. I said, you can't go with that contraption. He said, no, the French guy did it. Where? He said, he read it in the paper. I said, oh, the French guy went here.
You can go there. The
Right.
Eskimo can tell
Right.
you there.
It's crazy. So I don't believe 90% of things because most of the books you see in the modern times, the last 25 years written, I know the guys that did it, and it's not always the true thing what they did.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Do you think they were close, or they just they failed and
No,
tried
it's
to deceive
outright,
everyone?
some of them are outright deceiving because, and you know, there's always a sucker born every year. The sponsors get sucked into these things.
Yeah.
Now the world economy is down, so it's